In this episode of the podcast, y'all get to meet one of my family members, Clark Stacey. Clark is the CEO and co-founder of WildWorks. WildWorks is a game development company that's based out of Utah, and they have quite a few impressive game titles to their name, one of which is Animal Jam. It's a massive multiplayer online game that boasts well over 100 million worldwide players, and it's also educational. Yeah, it's kind of cool. And Clark is a very cool person, one of the smartest people I know, also one of the most well-rounded people that I know. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about several different things, one of which is the process of game development, as well as building a game development company. We're also going to talk about education and kind of different things that we can do to keep our creative juices flowing and much more. So let's go ahead and just dive into the episode. This is the TSS Podcast. It's a place for authentic conversations to uncover the stupid, simple truths that help us succeed and find happiness. Welcome to Think Stupid Simple. Clark, the people that are watching or listening to this right now kind of have no probably idea as to the scope of the things that you've created. So you are the founder of Smart Bomb, which then became WildWorks, correct?
That's right.
And as far as kind of overall size and scope of what you do, you have multiple pieces of intellectual property, meaning like multiple games that you guys have in development. Do you still have Animal Jam, right?
We do. Animal Jam is still a pretty massive online community in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So Clark, you're the founder of Animal Jam, which is licensed by National Geographic. How many players does this game have at this point?
Well, not licensed by National Geographic anymore.
Okay.
We had a partnership with them until about 2017,
Okay.
and now we partner with a lot of different conservation organizations, and I think most recently with We Forest, we planted a lot of trees in the last year.
That's crazy.
But yeah, I think last count that I saw, we were up between 130 and 135 million registered players.
That's insane.
Yeah, that's over 10 years. I mean, 10 years is a glacial age in video game industry time. So yeah, it's been an evergreen property that I think we still have its best years ahead of it. I think we're going to see it grow quite a bit in the coming year.
Now, can you give us I'm going to get into all the details, but can you give us a size like that we can wrap in our heads around, or if you can talk about this, but what are like revenue numbers? What is WildWorks where are you guys at in terms of yearly?
Well, I can tell you that Animal Jam, say, life to date has generated about 175 million. Over the course of 10 years. And of course, that's top line revenue. Most of that goes into the people and the bandwidth and the other things that make the game. But in terms of WildWorks annual revenue, I think we're looking this year to grow modestly from last year. So I think you could confidently pin it between 20 and 35 million, and say that leaves some room for modesty.
That's incredible. And you, last I knew of, you guys had 100 plus employees in the company, or what is the size of the team behind these projects?
Yeah, so we have about 85 people in our headquarters in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And then we have a lot of freelance folks, or a lot of part-time people that we work with, particularly in moderation, because Animal Jam is a game for kids 12 and under, and requires a lot of supervision on the playground, essentially. So we have a lot of adult child development experts and moderators that are around the country. Then we have about 15 or 20 people in the Philippines that help us with that moderation task, because kids in Animal Jam generate tons of artwork and tons of other stuff that really has to be looked at by a human being before it goes out. And then we have a team in India.
That's to maintain your rating, right? Is that to maintain like kind of the it's to maintain essentially the moderation is to maintain like the E for everybody type rating, to make it appropriate for children of all ages. Is that correct?
Well, here's the problem with with the kids game space in general is that the regulatory environment around kids games is really around parental consent and data privacy.
Okay.
So there's a law called COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in the U.S. that governs what we do. That says that if you were going to collect any data from a child under 13, that you need to have verifiable parental consent to collect that data.
Okay.
What you do with that afterwards, and what you do with the child with the account, as long as it's disclosed in that, there are no limitations on that. So we could have a moderator, a game without moderators, a game without safety people, a game without careful filtering.
Yeah.
But
that gets wild, right?
Not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, when you're talking about a massive multiplayer online game, if everybody kind of just has the freedom to create whatever, I would imagine that would get a place that you wouldn't want your children on.
No, and there's some very successful games out there that are popular with kids that are more or less kind of content free for alls. As long as you say you're over 13 when you create your account, you don't have to go through any of that, and you don't have the same burden on trying to keep it kid safe and age appropriate, I guess. So that plus our engineering team in India, it's another 8 or 9 guys. It's a bit over 100, but not all of those are full time working for us in our headquarters.
Crazy. Now, I should probably explain at this point. So I don't know. I want to explain how I know you. So you are actually married to Justin, my business partner, my closest friend. You're married to his sister, which I've been with the Lin family for as long as I can imagine. So I would think that we're as close as we could be without actually being blood related. But
yeah, I think there's something beyond honorary Lin that you've achieved, and maybe after 10, 11 years of being married to Jenny, I don't think I'm quite there yet, but in another 10 maybe.
I think you have more claim to the honorary Lin than I have, but so I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for a long time, and this podcast is kind of my excuse to do that. So but there's so many things that you do that are just they not only are inspiring, but I think I feel like a lot of people need to hear your story, the things that you've created. It's absolutely crazy to see. So you have Animal Jam, over 100 million users, over 100 million players on this platform, and now you've just launched a new product, right? Feral?
Right. So we've had Animal Jam going for 10 years, right?
Okay.
And some of the kids that started playing 10 years ago have now graduated from college and come to work for us.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we followed them all the way through college. We hear from kids all the time who, because Animal Jam has a lot of educational DNA in it, and sort of a message of conservation of wild places and animals, and a lot of kids have told us that they've pursued science careers because of this, and the audience for Animal Jam is about 80% girls, at least the most dedicated audience.
Mm-hmm.
So we've really leaned into promoting STEM education for girls, and trying to show science and engineering careers as cool and attainable for women. So we have a lot of women scientists that we work with in the game. They come in, they do Q&A with girls, like a marine biologist, veterinary scientists, and we try and show these careers as something that any girl who's interested in animals can aspire to and visualize for themselves. But after 10 years of Animal Jam, we start to see there's still a lot of players in there that were there 10 years ago. They're still playing Animal Jam in their late teens, early 20s. Because they haven't found anything quite like it elsewhere in the game sphere. the games industry itself, but definitely the game playing community
Yeah.
can be amazingly toxic for
Oh, for
women.
sure.
And I
Oh,
don't
for
think
women. Yeah,
you,
especially.
yeah, I don't think you and I will ever truly appreciate the depth of that unless you have the experience of, hopping into an Xbox Live game with your headset on and a female voice,
I
and,
agree.
and
I agree.
see
Yeah.
I mean, it's awful.
Yeah.
And I think that, that drives a lot of girls and women away from most gaming communities. So what we've tried to do with Animal Jam and what's emerging with Feral is we wanted to create a space for kids who are aging out of Animal Jam. Where do they go from there? They someplace that is a little edgier, a little more permissive than Animal Jam is in terms of the chat that's filtered and
Yeah.
the ability to send links back and forth and share artwork and things. There's still a walled garden there, but the walls are a little lower and geared especially for girls that are in that transitional time from 12 to mid late teens, where they're experimenting with their identity. They're struggling with the pressures that social media puts on them, and I think they need a online community space where they can just go be the weirdos that they feel that they are and play around with their identity and figure out who they are and
I love
do
this.
it in a
Is this something that we can pull up right now while you're talking about
yeah,
it?
yeah. If you go to the URL for it is fer.al.
FER to, yeah, keep going. Because as you're talking about this, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but on the Animal Jam side, so I have 4 kids at this point, which but maybe our audience doesn't. But I can't think of the art is beautiful. I can't think of a game experience gaming is either educational or it's fun, but I can't think of an MMO, a massive multiplayer online game that is both of those things, with the exception of Animal Jam, which is actually fun enough that you would have 100 million people playing it, but also educational and informative. Is there anything else like this?
Uh, not in the. I think what differentiates Animal Jam from games, there's some studios like Toca Boca make some fantastic games for kids, and some that have some educational elements to it. What I don't see anybody else doing but us right now is games for kids that have a social component to them.
For
And
sure.
that's because it's kind of the third rail in the games industry. If you have a social game that appeals to kids, you don't want it to be in the kids category of the App Store,
I see.
where
Anthony, pull
it's
up Animal Jam while he's
extremely
talking.
oh yeah, it's very onerous to be there. They make it very difficult to be profitable if you're in the App Store, to acquire users, to monetize them. So yeah, it's a high touch business to do this ethically and do it right.
Yeah.
So we don't, Animal Jam is not monetizing through ads. It's monetizing through subscription, which we think is probably the most transparent way to do that for parents and kids.
For sure.
The mobile games industry in general is driven by whales, by big spenders who are playing games that are engineered to help them spend big. they're, really the psychology has been perfected in gambling machines over the last 50 years, and is really down to a very precise and lucrative science. The sort of psychological triggers that you use to induce and increase spend in a mobile game are the same kind of things that you would find being applied in slot machines.
That's super.
And
Yeah, it's super shady, incredibly.
well, if it's adults, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. They
Yeah.
can certainly opt into that. I've spent I've spent some money in mobile games, and I've had a lot of fun with it. And I haven't felt like I've been built out of that, necessarily. I think that I've probably gotten more entertainment for that $10 or $20 than I would have for the cost of a movie or whatever it was. So,
But for children's
but
games that
when
are
it's
employing,
kids,
yeah,
yeah, when it's kids, you can't generate whales. In fact, you've got to engineer your game not to generate whales. The reason being, first of all, you're not going to build the trust with parents and partners and things. It allows you to keep operating. Um, you are going to live under a karmic cloud that
yeah.
ultimately is going to result in a very ironic death for you somewhere somehow. I shudder to think.
So that
So yeah,
basically rules out advertising revenue. It also rules out building in products that get people to spend significant amounts of money. So it kind of gives you one path, right?
you can do advertising with kids media safely. You can't do programmatic ads or ads that are tracking the
Mm,
user or studying their behavior or anything. But children's television has been ad supported forever, and a lot of it sucked, but a lot of it has been really good.
hmm.
There are advertisers out there that want to reach children, and there are some that are willing to uh, do it in an ethical way. There are some companies. Super Awesome comes to mind, which was recently acquired by Epic,
Hmm.
that they specialize in kid safe ads for web and for games that enable developers to monetize, but in a much less aggressive way.
Interesting. Okay, so then going back now, Animal Jam is the starting place. Your initial users of Animal Jam are now transitioning into adulthood, and then we have
Right.
Feral. Can you tell us a little about Feral while Anthony pulls it up?
Right. Right. So capitalizing on that idea that we have all of these players, if you look at the demographic map of Animal Jam players right now, you'd see that it peaks between 9 and 11 years old and then tapers off gradually until you get to 16 plus, where there's this
Hmm.
huge spike. That huge spike is all older kids and adults that are still playing Animal Jam because they haven't found a community like that. Uh, so the idea with Feral is it it doesn't have the same educational DNA of Animal Jam. Um, it is drawing on lots of different folklore and world mythologies with the premise that what if you brought all of these mythological animals together from all of these different traditions and put them in a reality show? Um, and it's the actual day-to-day gameplay of that is much more like Animal Jam in that it's very community driven.
Hmm.
There's you're not trying to level up your character to complete the next quest. There are elements of that kind of thing in there, but that's not really what drives engagement. What drives engagement is the community that you create there and the persona that you create. I think uh, Farrell's success so far is driven in part by a very robust character creator. That when you first join the game, you will create an animal, and you may create more throughout your playtime with the game. And starting with uh, our basic starters of say a mythological fox or a werewolf or something, you'll be able to build on that something that is absolutely unique and doesn't look like anybody else's character in the game.
Interesting.
And then there's a lot of crafting where you're going out into the world, you're gathering ingredients, you're making things. They might be items of clothing, they might be spells that you use in the game, and you're able to trade those with other players. So you have players that are beginning to specialize in different types of things that they make for other players.
Hmm.
Um, like Animal Jam, uh, a lot of the dynamic between players is driven by trading and art. So Animal Jam players using the in-game painting tool submit to us upwards of 20,000 more masterpieces per day, and those have to be hand moderated, but then they become objects that the kids can trade in the game. They can hang it up in their den, they can have friends come look at it. So you see this kind of underground art market emerge there where popular players, everybody wants their artwork.
Interesting.
And we're looking to develop the same kind of community in Feral where uh, your social cachet is not based on how much you spend in the game. It's based on the creativity that you apply to your character, to the sanctuary that you create for yourself and invite friends into. The way that you play, and so it's not like you come in and we're going to try and get as much money out of you as we can every month. Um, it, and the goal is for you to spend more and more and more so that you can set yourself apart from everybody else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Much more of how you set yourself apart in this world is what you create, and that's a formula that has worked well in Animal Jam, and we think is beginning to demonstrate that it's going to work very well with an older audience.
This is fascinating. So is Feral an open world game essentially? Is that
It is, yeah.
okay?
It's a persistent virtual world where you drop it at any time. You're going to encounter hundreds of other players running around and the characters that they've created. Um, right now, it is just you can download and play it on PC and Mac.
Uh-huh.
Little in another couple of weeks here, it's going to be available on mobile devices through Google Play and Apple. Um, and that's really when it's kind of in what we would call early access right now, where everybody who's playing it are more or less, there's about 175,000 ex Animal Jam players that signed up to play in the beta, and they've brought friends, and that's kind of the player base that we're going into the mobile launch with. But so far, we have not spent a dollar on user acquisition, and we're seeing some pretty amazing engagement numbers in there already.
That's fantastic. And I love the premise of it. It kind of reminds me of I mean, the art is beautiful. Like the art design and everything is incredible to just visually look at. But it reminds me of an MMO based around kind of this Minecraft idea of like going, and I only say that because Minecraft is something that everybody would think of,
Sure.
but
Yeah,
it kind of feels like this go in, there's quests and the whole goal is to explore, create, and connect. Is that kind of the premise?
absolutely. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
It's kind of the principle that everybody is a creator, everybody is a participant, and Minecraft's a good example. I think the popular Minecraft streamers and YouTubers and Twitch people, they're amazing at playing the game and
Yeah.
at finding kind of the exploits for the game. But by and large, they're not going to build something incredible. There are Minecraft builders that are mind
Yeah.
blowing, but a lot of the popular players, Dream and people like that, are not really building this incredible artistic edifice, and that's what makes most people are consumers of content in these
Hmm.
types of games, even in something like Roblox, where you can basically build your own game. Most people aren't doing that. Most people are in there consuming the games that other people build. Um, I think what we're trying to demonstrate, and particularly for girls and young women who are playing this, is that they have the power to be creators and to control a virtual world that they create, and that they have the right and authority to kind of set their own boundaries in there.
Yeah. Well, it's again from the standpoint, and I used to I still enjoy games a lot, but I from the standpoint of someone who plays games, I can think of very few. I'm having a struggle just like thinking of one that are both entertaining as well as educational, as well as like they're kind of pushing people towards that end. So from that side, I literally can't think of anything other than Animal Jam and Feral that are actually entertaining enough, but also educate. Do you know what I mean? Like most educational games are kind of sucky games.
I think that there have been some fantastic educational modules created in and around Minecraft or Roblox.
Sure.
A friend of mine had an academic project at one point using modding a Sims game to teach informal logic that
Hmm.
was that was amazing. I mean, it sounds kind of weird when I describe it, but you really have to play it. So there's a lot of interesting work being done there. By and large, people aren't seeing it, except with maybe some of it in Minecraft and Roblox because some schools are introducing it. But there really is interesting work in the intersection between games and education being done. But you're right. I mean, most of it in terms of the gameplay, it doesn't rise with the level of polish and depth of a pure fun commercial game. And by the same token, pure fun commercial games don't really have the pedagogy or educational depth to them, you know.
Well, and that's what I remember. We actually had a text conversation a while back. I don't know if you remember this, but I was like, why can't there be a World of Warcraft, a game that is fun, hyper addicting, engaging, all these different things, but why can't it also educate and inform? Like, why can't there be a little bit more there where like a parent could actually say, hey, it's okay to get lost in here for a few hours. You'll actually come away with something. I didn't, it felt like there was, and your products are kind of the only thing that I've seen thus far that are bridging that. And maybe, like you said, there's more coming up, but nothing that I can think of that's actually getting commercial success.
No, certainly not on that scale. And you know, in a lot of ways, that's what drew me into the games industry to begin with. I thought that my career was going to be in academia. I was working at the University of Utah and helping teach classes there in mythology and Greek and Roman athletics and you know, kind of the classics field. And as I started getting into, you know, the online multiplayer games of the time, and also beginning to work with game companies just in developing narrative for them, I was blown away by the idea of why couldn't you create a virtual Athens in 500 BC where, you know, you could go and interact with these famous scholars, you could read their texts, you could learn to translate Greek and Latin, you know, in real time in a virtual world. And yeah, there are academic projects that take swings at that kind of thing, and some of them are really interesting. But you're right; they don't get mainstream play or attention.
Yeah, it feels like still a very large area for opportunity, but I can imagine it being, you know, it's largely I would say an unproven area in terms of like there's very few companies, very few people that have done it well, which usually when there's very few examples of things that have done it well, then it's more difficult to source investors for something like that. Hence Hollywood's issue of making the same movie over and over and over again.
I think my perspective as somebody who grew up in like where gaming took the turn from Nintendo, so like early N64 to like how realistic Xbox games went, and like how one of the causes that the gaming area is so vicious as it is now, like you said, the Xbox Live chats just gets so disgusting sometimes.
Oh yeah, I would never let my kids in evil. Any of those.
I think that what the game served for people growing up who are particularly like my age, like millennials, is that it was like a form of rebellion and escapism in a lot of ways. So I think that's why like my generation was so hard to buy into a lot of the like educational games. To me is like the Leapfrog and stuff, the stuff that we were advertised like 10 years ago. And my generation tends to stick to things like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, where it was a form of living this alternate life that was free from the rules and bound by whatever is going on in real life. And so I think parents were kind of like struck from the side that they didn't know how to deal with this when it was being developed so fast. And now that parents especially are aware of the detrimental effects of just an open platform, people just spew whatever, and we see kind of like how vicious and nasty people can get on the internet. I think it is a good opportunity to kind of like expose kids to games at an early age and kind of like help push them and lean them into more educational games. I feel like it's going to be a lot easier now than it was like 10 years ago.
Well, yeah, but so Anthony, you are 20, what?
26.
26.
Yeah.
Clark, you're 40 as well. Are you 40?
I turned 50 this year.
50. Actually. Your Wikipedia is 10 years, shows you 10 years young. Okay. So
I haven't had anything to do with the construction of it.
So so I'm 40 now. My generation, and Clark, I think we share this commonality. But I remember video games wasn't anything like cool to play in our generation. It was like you were kind of an outcast if you were playing video games instead of doing sports and other things. I don't feel like this became something that was like cool or an act of rebellion until maybe 10 years ago.
It was like mid-2000s, like early 2000s.
Maybe 20 years ago.
I think even though it's only 10 years that separate us there, I think that's 10 years where you would have missed the arcade heyday and arcade culture as it existed in the early 80s, especially, which is, you would have been.
Yeah. I caught the tail end of it.
Yeah.
I caught the tail end of that.
So that was my tween and teen years. And when, it was a big deal. It was its own kind of counterculture. But it was also somewhat democratizing in that you go into an arcade and you would see businessmen, you would see punkers, you would see whoever with the games that they were drawn to.
So you're saying that in that era, it wasn't so much of it was more community oriented. Because I remember I did get some of the arcade era, which I feel like we could talk about forever on its own. But I got a little bit of it. But I just remember in high school and in junior high, the only people playing games like that had like Super Nintendos and the early PlayStation, we were all nerds. I mean, we were all geeks that loved that stuff. And the people that were playing video games, like the ones that you described, or the ones that were, I would say, more cool, were usually the ones that were in the arcades. Like they would actually go to an arcade, but they didn't have a console. They didn't have their own system. But going to Anthony's point, as a father of 4, I would not, and you have kids too, I would not like allow my kids just to jump onto these games. And the thing is, the stuff that they want to play versus what that stuff does for them is there's no games that they want to play that are actually beneficial. Very few. Maybe I would say maybe there's more now with like Oculus and that kind of stuff because there's more interaction, hand-eye coordination, that kind of stuff. But usually the games that they want to play are games like Halo. They're games like, Doom. These are first-person shooters. They're, Fortnite. That have absolutely no educational value beyond just the simple entertainment value. And that's why I find what you're doing so intriguing, of trying to bridge these two places of like, can we create something that is as entertaining as it is educational?
Well, I think I would take issue with the idea that there's no educational value to Halo or Fortnite or games like that, for a couple of reasons. Because
what do you think it is?
Primates like us learn through play, as most animals do. And a lot of what we absorb and learn through play is how social interaction works. And if I'm playing Halo or Fortnite with a group of friends, then even if we're separated by quarantine or whatever it is, that's a place where some of those social dynamics and things can be absorbed virtually, and where the pure entertainment value of it, it is pure entertainment value. But if it's not actively deleterious to kids, you could say that playing board games is pure entertainment value, or playing tag is largely entertainment value. It's play, and there's a lot that we learn from play in both constructing our social persona and in learning to cooperate or compete without emotional regulation. There's learning that's taking place there, especially if kids are playing together in a way that's, if they're dropped into that Xbox Live environment where, it's toxic, it's adults swearing at each other, it's all this horrible stuff going on. Well, no.
That's kind of what I worry about. I mean, I see what you're saying. When I was, you remember the good old LAN party days, right? So if you don't know what a LAN party is, this was where we would grab our 30-pound computers back in, this is 20 years ago. We'd grab our 30-pound computers, go and set up a network. We'd rent out a hotel room. We'd go and set up like with 8 other friends. Everyone brings their computers. I mean, there's probably a collective $20,000 of equipment there just to play video games together. And you network, which usually LAN parties turn into about 2 hours worth of troubleshooting just to get started. And then you play. I can see the social engagement and the value of that. I could also see the social engagement and the value of like kids today hopping on with their friends to play together, like in a group of 8 people and they go and start a party. But I don't see that being the majority of the online interaction going on. I see the majority of kids just hopping onto random PUBG games and jumping in where there's just 100 people going on and people are on their microphones screaming at each other, shouting at each other, F you, F this, like just going to town. And that's from a guy's perspective. I can't even imagine, like you said, we can't even imagine from the girl's perspective dropping into that. So I don't know. Is the social engagement thing as viable, like of a argument there?
It is, but as you were saying, you wouldn't let your kids go and play in that space. I think you could take the same 5,000 square foot warehouse space and have it be an educational daycare during the day and a biker bar at night. You're not going to drop your kids off when it's in biker bar mode, right? But that same space can also be a nurturing and
how well are they going to convert this space, Clark?
It's faster than you'd think.
Okay.
you pull off some drop cloths and you're there.
Pull out the black lights, get all the weird bodily fluids off of everything, and then
it's not that hard. No.
But
the point being that there's a level of parental involvement that it's time consuming, it's high touch, and it's commonly not done. And in part, the reason it's not done is it's not made easy by the platform owners and holders to begin with.
Yeah.
It is, if a kid wants to go get on YouTube and they can go create an account on YouTube or create an account on YouTube Kids. YouTube Kids takes 15 minutes, multiple menus, getting a parent, having them taking their time to do their thing. It's a colossal pain in the butt to create a YouTube Kids account. Create a YouTube account like that. All you got to do is just say, I'm over 13. I don't think that the solution there, though, is to say to these platforms, okay, you absolutely have to test, somehow the age of these kids. I think you have to create spaces within YouTube itself. You have to create spaces within Fortnite, within PUBG that are the kid spaces. And
child safe, friendly spaces.
They require adult supervision.
I have a question though, actually. My question is, like, how do you find that space where that works? Because today's like games on Xbox, it's like literally Lord of the Flies. Like, it's just kids and no adults, no supervision going at it. So it's just people just say whatever, no accountability whatsoever. But then the other side is, if you do have a game where let's just say some bombastic kid just comes on and starts spewing a bunch of like curse words and stuff, like, obviously you just like take him off and like remove him from the game because you want that to be controlled. Like, where do you find that line before I guess some kids might be like, oh, it might be a little too restrictive, or it's like, oh, it's I guess where's the bridge where it becomes a little too restrictive, but it's not just open for anyone just to come in and start taking it over and completely like turning upside down? Like, how do you find that gap?
Well, I think that's the question, but also how can you automate more of that moderation so that it doesn't require an army of people monitoring it at all times to do it, because that doesn't scale very well. You need machine learning tools that can help you with that if you're going to do it effectively.
This feels like the crux of why it doesn't exist, because of what you just said. Like, it feels like, when you go to a 24-hour fitness and they have a child daycare area, they have one person to every 4 children or whatever. That's not economically possible in an online world. So do you feel like we're waiting on the tools on that side, like the AI-based tools to be able to help moderate?
In part, and those are there, and they're getting better. There are, for instance, in Animal Jam and Feral, we use a trust-based system that a company called Two Hat Security has created, and we've helped them develop over the years in Animal Jam, where when you first come into a world using this, the vocabulary that you have or the dictionary that you have to communicate with is pretty limited. But as the system sees you over a period of time and sees that you're not trying to, break through the guardrails, you're not trying to say things that you shouldn't be, then it opens up more and more to the point where it's now you can type things that aren't in the dictionary. You can type, weird little abbreviations and things, and we don't take your trust level back unless we see some transgression through that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a built-in incentive there, even though players might not be consciously aware of it, to just be friendly and stay cool and not not try to push the boundaries just to be demonstrative or something.
Okay, so I'm very curious what you've created this far in everything that WildWorks, like all these properties that WildWorks owns, is absolutely incredible, and I'm very curious just to take this back a little bit. When did you know you wanted to actually be in games? You mentioned earlier that you were actually teaching academics and mythology at the University of Utah, which go Utes, by the way, fellow Ute right here. So when did you know like you wanted to transition into video games?
When I was an undergraduate at the University of Utah, my first kind of college job that I was working through college was I started as a bouncer and later a bartender at a club in downtown Salt Lake. And it was initially, when I started working there, kind of a pretty rowdy beer bar. It graduated into being kind of a pretty rowdy private club, nightclub type situation. But the owner of that place, an entrepreneur named Chris Johnson, was this brilliant self-taught programmer whose dream had always been to make video games. And he just, because he saw an opportunity to buy and operate a bar profitably when he was 20 years old or something. He did that, but he was spending his days programming games more or less on his own, and then he'd bring them into the bar at night for us to test. And so at the end of the night, 2 a.m, we'd lock the doors and open the taps, and we'd play whatever he'd been working on during the day. I started helping him out with that stuff, even as I finished my undergraduate. I started working for the classics department up there, and it came about pretty soon that I saw that what he was doing was more exciting, more fun than what I was doing, and I felt at the time had more educational potential to reach more people.
So you had that educational slant back then, like I mean that's why you were.
It was in the back of my mind, because it was writing and narrative and story that drove me into classics and English lit to begin with, and this seemed like a new storytelling medium that could have the same kind of visceral effect that the powerful societal myth forms have had for thousands of years. And I still think that about games, and there are still experiences that I've had in games that are formative in that way. But at the time, it was I began helping him with some of the stuff that he was doing, and gradually, came to spend more time doing that before joining him full time and becoming a partner. And we made games as a company called Beyond Games for several years. And
you make this seem so easy. So wait, you taught yourself programming at that point? Did you know programming?
No, I did not. At the time, this was So when I was working for the classics department up there, one of the things that I was teaching in the honors department was how to use the internet. This was
Interesting.
It
Okay.
was while I was in college that the World Wide Web was first introduced.
So this is like
And
98-ish, 97, 98.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So when you were, oh, it's earlier than that.
Oh,
It's
earlier.
early 90s. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
so the games that were being played over the internet were text-based multiple user
Yeah.
dimensions, and nonetheless engrossing or evocative for being just text-based. But you didn't have visual hyperlinked easy data searching the way that you do now. You had menu driven things like Gopher that were run on academic computers, and that were they were difficult to use, and it was this newfangled thing, a new tool for researching for students. And I was helping teach. Here's how you find things on the internet, and here's like a little internet scavenger hunt to go and find some information somewhere. So I was maybe at that point really interested in the storytelling aspects of games more than anything.
Okay.
Programming as web pages became more common, I got into programming those, but no, never, aside from markup languages, never learned any, or never learned much actual engineering. What I was doing from the beginning was creating the narratives behind the games, doing game design, ultimately doing the actual game experience design, and the business stuff around it.
So this is what you focused on with your first partner
Right.
from that side. Okay.
Right.
And then your first company that you guys went on to found, this was 20 something years ago. What was the name of that company again? It was
he had founded a company called Beyond Games
Beyond
back
Games.
in 1992.
Okay.
And I joined full time in 95 after doing some part-time work with him up until then.
Yeah.
And then Beyond Games continued until I think about 2002, when we sold its assets and went on to found Smart Bomb, which became WildWorks.
Yeah. And Smart Bomb, you guys were originally creating licensed games, right? For other companies, or how did that?
Well, this was the path when I first got involved in the games industry. You started out as an indie developer, and unless you had some funding to begin with,
Yeah.
you generally went out and did work for hire projects for big publishers like Activision or EA or somebody. And then you hope to build up enough of a war chest to invest in your own IP, in off cycles. So yeah, when we first started the company, some of our first projects were like a kart racing game with the Pac-Man license. We did some Snoopy dogfighting games. We were doing some stuff with Activision Value and others, but we found that we were gravitating towards the kids market early on, just because we saw such a gap in the market there. All the games for kids just absolutely sucked that were coming out. It was whatever the latest animated movie was. Somebody like THQ would go out and license it, and they'd pay some hapless developer like us to crank something out in 6 months that would go out on 4 SKUs like PlayStation, GameCube, and Game Boy Advance or whatever, and just scrape something together to put in a box and put it on the shelf at Walmart in time for Christmas.
Yeah.
Because most of the sales that took place, or a big proportion of them, took place right around Christmas. And if it was the right licensed property and it was packaged right, it didn't really matter what was in the box. They were going to get a certain level of sales anyway. So we saw that we'd been making all of these much more expensive and technical action games, M-rated games. We thought, well, if we could bring the production values there and some of the technology to kids games, then we would immediately be the 800-pound gorilla of kids games. We couldn't go out and engineer a completely new game engine from the ground up, like Epic or Unity wasn't. This was before Unity, but we could certainly compete on that basis by going into an area where there was this underserved demographic and do much better games than they were used to seeing there.
Did you have? I can't remember. Your oldest, was this before you had kids, or was this after that you started feeling this want to meet this market?
Yeah. When my oldest was born, we were still making blow stuff up games, right? In fact, it was shortly after that I the first game that I designed kind of from start to finish was a PC game called Redline that we published a couple of years after that. So no, it wasn't really until the early aughts and the formation of Smart Bomb where we saw that market opportunity.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious what gave you the motivation to kind of tune this towards children. Like if you were seeing firsthand, like, hey, these children games suck because I have kids that hate these games, or was it something else?
No, it was certainly informed by my kids and the kind of stuff that I know they like to play, which at the time was the first Halo and the type of action games that now are easy to play multiplayer. At the time were much more single player driven, at least on console. And I think it was really more of seeing the market opportunity than seeing, wow, the games that my kids are getting really suck. I bet we could do better than that. It was more when we're starting the company and we're going out and talking to publishers, and nobody wanted to make these kids games. Nobody wanted to make the Pac-Man kart racer, or nobody wanted to make the latest Pixar movies, 6-month game project. Those were, a lot of developers thought that was kind of beneath them.
For sure.
So I think it was more, we saw the opportunity to come in and do those better than was expected.
It's interesting because as you're telling me this, I'm thinking of this other conversation that I actually just had today with a photographer, and we were talking about, there's kind of this. So when you first kind of begin, it's really about figuring out a way to kind of put money on the table to do what you described as building up your war chest. And then once you have the kind of luxury essentially to do so, you go out and you do personal projects. You kind of take aim and you throw things at the board to see what can I get to stick that are actually in the realm of what I want to do. And this eventually leads you down to the thing that you actually want to do. Because I would imagine when you're designing or when you're creating for these other companies and these other pieces of IP, that probably at times felt soul crushing, no?
Yeah, and in fact, it's not the path that I would recommend. I wouldn't say if you're driven to get into the games industry, you might feel like you're starving now, but you're actually less encumbered than you're likely to be at any point in your life. Start pursuing those projects immediately. Don't postpone it as it's a quid pro quo. When I get a couple of commercial things done, then I'll start work on that. You can do it in parallel, in part because game development has been just radically democratized in the last 10 years. With the availability free of game engines as powerful as Unity or Unreal, you're working with tools that companies like ours were spending $10 million to develop in-house 15 years ago.
But if you know what you want to do, then to me that makes complete sense, is to take aim and take your stabs. Like you could do it when you're in high school, when you have no debt, you're still with your parents, all the way through college, like taking aim and doing that. But if you're someone like me who tried. I mean, I thought I wanted to be a game developer when I was young, and then I got a job. I don't know if I ever told you this. I got a job at Acclaim Entertainment. In
Oh, I think you did. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was at Acclaim Entertainment in '98 with the release of WWF Attitude, a wrestling game, which
I know a bunch of people that worked on that actually.
yeah. So that was, so if you look in the credits, I am right there under. I was a QA. I was a game tester, which you'd think is the greatest job in the world. That was absolutely miserable. Like you go into a dank, dark room on a daily basis, sit next to 8 other dudes, and all you're doing is sitting in your own farts, your own burps, and you're playing video games for 8 to 10 hours plus each day.
Or you're not even playing them. You're trying to break them.
Trying to break them. You're doing weird things.
Playing them and having fun. You're trying to break them and play the same sequence over and over and over again to find out exactly how you broke it.
Yes,
it's not fun.
100%. And so you'd write your reports. You'd submit your your whatever, your write-ups, and it was during that time where I was coding in high school, and I'm like, I really want to make a career out of this. And then I actually kind of got the chance to get my hands on some of the code. So some of the developers that were there, they kind of started taking me under their wing, and they'd start showing me, okay, this is like our debug machine. This is what we're going to do next. And then I saw that this mother effing game had 1 million lines of GD code to it. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, the stuff that I've been working on in school had 1,000 lines, a couple thousand lines. I think I got ridiculous at one point and made a simple video game that had 10,000 lines of code. But when it got to this place, and when I started doing what it actually was, I found out that very quickly that I had absolutely no interest whatsoever in doing this full time. So I leave that and go into then, I did my 2 years of service work, came back, did accounting, and then it took this roundabout path to eventually fall into photography at the age of 30. So at that point, I think, like a lot of people, you have debts and responsibilities and all these different things where you don't have necessarily the luxury of, like, you don't have the war chest. You don't have the ability to just throw things at the wall. And so you're stuck with this. I'm either going to do licensing work to build up the war chest, or I'm going to go and, do some sort of photography work to kind of like get things moving. And then when I have the ability again to kind of throw things at the wall, I'm going to do it. Do you feel like that's the majority of people? Do you feel like that's the minority?
The problem with that is that then 20 years slip by and you haven't really chipped away at it at all.
For sure.
Right. And, that's something, there's writing projects that I've felt the same way about. I've done the same thing. But what I've seen in talking to people smarter than I am and looking at people who've succeeded in this realm is, if you want to write, then write. And if you can't make enough money from it to eat, then, go and do what you have to do for 8-9 hours a day and take an hour, 2 hours, whatever you can grab. But I think that for most people, probably not for QA people at Acclaim, because they're, being browbeaten into, you can't step away for 15 minutes. But, I look at my typical day, and could I, by optimizing what I'm doing, could I knock off an hour earlier? And could I, be more productive for the first half of the day and devote a little bit of time to a personal project later on? I know people who are doing it. I've, to some degree, have done it successfully in some areas myself. And the problem with postponing that dream project is it just goes on too long, and your mind becomes less pliable. The channels that you've carved into your gray matter are more in line with what you're doing to make money than the channels and pathways that you needed to create to be successful in some creative endeavor. To create that craft and hone that craft, you can't postpone it and then hope to pick it up when you've got time or when you've got money, because either that's never going to happen, or by the time you get to it, you're going to find that you're really well optimized as a thinker for accounting, and no longer optimized for game development or whatever it is.
100%. And I am not so much saying to procrastinate. I think I agree with you. That would be the death of kind of your dream, your vision. I'm saying I had no clue what the heck I wanted to do. I'm saying like it took me throwing things at the wall for the better part of a decade and a half to figure out, okay, I like photography, I like writing, and podcasting didn't even exist, but like writing, photography, and this are the things that drive me, that motivate me. And by the time that I had discovered that, I was 30 years old and then had the responsibilities. And I feel like that's a lot of people. We kind of get into this like, you get into this kind of groove of like going where you're sort of told, this is what you should be doing. This is what leads to success. This is what does this. And then ending up learning later on that this is not really what I want to be doing. I mean, you, for example, were at the school teaching classics, but that had nothing to do with where you ended up or where you wanted to be. And that's kind of where I'm driving at, is how did you get to that?
Well, I would step back for just a moment to something that you said there and point out that you did find that stuff, right? It wasn't what you started out doing, but within what you were doing, you started carving out a little bit of time here and there to experiment with different things.
Correct.
And by taking things apart that interested you and looking under the hood of things that interested you, you found, wow, there's some areas here that I feel some aptitude for, that I feel some passion for, and I can start to double down on those. And that's more what I'm saying is
sure.
that
once you find those things.
Yeah, that perpetual curiosity, that perpetual need to take things apart and see how they work, to be like an octopus. Mm-hmm. Octopuses are great at this. They're constantly taking stuff apart, finding ways in and out of things. They never stop exploring the environment around them, mm-hmm. whether it's completely black or whether they're in in Exxon Valdez oil, or whether they're in the deep ocean. They are constantly exploring their environment and finding little hacks and finding ways to open things and get through things. That's what we need to be doing, even if our day job is paying the bills. There's always a little bit of time to carve for that. And for me, it was, I didn't, this wasn't like, I was fortunate to find my way into the industry that enabled me to realize all these dreams. Going into that industry for me was the compromise at the mm-hmm. time. It was, I'm going to go do this and try and make a bunch of money for a few years so that I can go and write full time. Mm. And thinking at the time that the sort of writing that I wanted to do was not the kind of thing that I could do in an interactive fiction environment. And I was fortunate to discover over time that there were other parts of creating those interactive experiences that I was good at and that I had some passion for, and that found I could potentially even do some good with.
Yeah, I wish that curiosity, I wish that throwing things against the wall and trying and testing and things, I wish those were things that I would have learned and someone would have taught me when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. Yes. To start that process, so that by the time I found something that stuck, I was still youthful. I was still 18, at home, didn't have a whole lot of those responsibilities. And I think the people that are fortunate enough to get on that path and to find that thing when they don't, it's a decade's worth of time. It's a decade's worth of time that you make up for by having to take the long way, which I would say that mine is the long way of, okay, now I'm this age, but I've got to go and make the money that I need to support myself to be able to go and do the thing that I want to do. And I think you're talking about a couple years to get something that you dream of off the ground versus a decade to get back to what it is that you want to be doing.
Right. So. And you're right, because that needs to be the ethos of your education even earlier than 10 years old or whatever. And it's part of what is fundamentally broken with education and the way that we do it and institutionalize it now is that there isn't much ethos of experimentation there, except in small pockets. It's, there's a core of stuff that you've got to plow through, and you've got to kind of keep everybody in the class. It's sort of the same area. It's not very adaptive to different learning styles. And I think what it fails to inculcate in kids is that the reason that you're learning this stuff is so that you're better at taking stuff apart, at experimenting with things and exploring ideas. And you're not learning history just so to piss you off. You're not learning it because it's completely irrelevant for the rest of your life. You're not learning math just so that, we can check a box and say that, yes, he knows this much math.
Yeah.
You're learning those things because they help you take ideas apart and take things apart that you might want to build and figure out what comprises them and how they go together, so that you can find something that you want to make and understand the components to it, and find the tribe that will help you build it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest issues with the educational system is the lack of connecting what you're learning to actually real world application. I think maybe the only place where learning is kind of imitating doing is in the world of academia itself, where learning something is similar to the idea of teaching it somewhat. Okay, so if you're actually going to, learn philosophy and then teach philosophy, roughly those two things are kind of similar. But in every other arena, let's say, for example, accounting. I loved studying accounting. It was fantastic. Seeing how a business works from the top was wonderful. I loved every aspect of it. But doing it was soul crushing. And doing it had no resemblance of learning about it. Doing it was the bean counter that was literally talking about one line item on a... So for those that don't know, I used to be an auditor for Ernst & Young. Now, what is it like to be an auditor? Okay, they give you an account. I'm going to give you the dumbed down, interesting version of this, because in reality, it actually sucked a lot worse. But here's a financial statement, and they'll say, okay, Pi, your job is to go and verify that fixed assets, that number that they're reporting, $1.2 billion, is actually accurate. Okay, well, what are fixed assets? Oh, it's all the buildings and all the furniture and everything that we own. Okay, so my job was then to go and look at this one account and to say, okay, I'm going to need to request all the different receipts and all the support and everything to go and verify that this number is accurate. And that's literally what you're doing. You're just bean counting. And guess what? These companies were so big, my job would be one of those accounts. So I would just look at one thing. Now, when I learned about it, learning about accounting was learning at a high level what companies do, what goes on, how do we make good decisions, how do we do this. And what I realized in actually doing it was that the type of work that I did in college was about 15 years away from where I would need to work into as a profession. Like, only partners would be able to look at something at that level. And it's not just accounting. You look at psychology. How many psychology classes have you taken, yet how many of us leave college and high school and high school, then college, then all that stuff without the faintest idea of how a friendship or a relationship actually functions? Like, we have no clue. We have all this theoretical knowledge, but we don't actually know how it applies. Like, how many of us go in and can't understand human relationships despite having taken the courses? So that was the impetus actually for the book that I wrote. But that's my huge issue is, like, you learn about these things and you're supposed to, I get the idea. College and high school, it's supposed to be throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. But that's not what it is. It ends up becoming this rote memorization of all of these different topics to pass tests, and then realizing that the real world bears no semblance to what you just did.
Humans struggle in environments where they can't find meaning. And for adolescents, for kids, especially in the high school years, to be learning something that seems to have no applicability to anything that you want to do is soul crushing, and it turns you off of learning altogether. So I think that there's two problems there. There's connecting meaning to something that you need to learn. If you need to learn trigonometry, can you learn it in relation to, there's something I want to build. I want to build a house, or I want to know where, where the shadow is going to be cast on this house in, if it was here in 38 BC, so that I could tell what, some writing from then was referring to, and relate it to a problem, a problem that you actually want to solve. And then you find that kids are very engaged learners. That kind of thing, when you catch their interest by attaching meaning to it, they will drill down on it. They will drive you to learn more about it. The problem is that is individualized to the child, to their personality, their interests, the way that they learn, the types of information that they respond to. Are they visual learners? Are they abstract learners? Are they good readers? Are they not? And in order to individualize it that way, obviously you can't have every child being homeschooled by an attentive parent who has all of the child development skills and the creativity to tailor a curriculum for them that is going to engage their imagination and blow their minds open and drive them towards learning. So how do you do that in a group environment? How do you do that in an institutionalized environment scale? That's the first problem. The second problem is that you have to inculcate in them from the beginning a sense that you can go out and define your own problems, and that you're learning all of this so that you become a creator and not a consumer. That you have the capability to do that. And I think that the way that education is structured now is it reinforces the idea that you are a consumer. You are a consumer of education, and then you will go out and you will do whatever you're channeled into, and you will be a consumer of other things, and not somebody that can decide after their accounting education that they're going to be writers on all these diverse topics, and that they're going to create amazing photographic art. You were fortunate, I think, in arriving at that kind of freedom on your own.
Yeah, I would say that there's this, and those are kind words, thank you. But I would say that there was like you were saying, like there has to be that drive of like when someone gets you pushed into a job that you don't necessarily want to do, there's that 1 or 2 hours, that time that you steal away, whatever you got to do to make something work, and that drive has to be present. And I think the only reason why Justin, Chris, and I were here was because you dislike something enough, you're going to put enough time into figuring out something else that works. But I'm so curious, like, is there, so the way that I imagine like the future schoolroom, the future classroom is, can there not be this like, and this is a super dumbed down, my own idiot's version of what this might look like. But I mean, can there not be a version of this where a physics teacher says, okay, put on your headsets. You have maybe glasses that have like a virtual, kind of interface type thing. We're already there. We already have Oculus. We already have all those different things. Put on your glasses, and they show like a simulation of like, maybe it's a car that is running into the column of a bridge, and says, look, today we're going to study force versus impact. Now, watching the collision, I want you to try and guess how much force this is connecting with. And basically showing the kids, like, this is how it translates. Now, this is why this is actually important. Now, I want you guys to actually restructure this and put in the right formula into this. Let's watch it back again. And then to actually make the adjustments necessary in the structure to have a different outcome of that car running into that thing, and to say, this is what engineers do. So as an engineer, your job is this. To bridge this gap between learning why the hell do I need to know the quadratic equation versus what that thing is actually applying to. And I think there's great I don't know. To me, I imagine like virtual reality playing a big piece in this future classroom, in helping to bridge that gap. But I don't know. So I'm curious
No,
what you think.
I think you're right. I think that's always been the promise of digital media, is that you will be able to visualize concepts better that you may have never impressed on somebody, the significance of calculus until you see it applied to a real world problem, right?
Yes.
Or, in the situation that you're talking about, can I go in and mess with some parameters in a simulation? Can I turn the speed down? Can I mess with the angle? And can I see exactly how that comes out in the results of the collision? Now that's cool. Now I kind of understand the inputs and I understand what comes out. Now I want to understand, how are those interacting? How are those, what is the math behind that? I think that those visualizations have been there, and I think that they can get better, and the democratization of game technology is helping with that. I think that things like
Goat Simulator,
I was going to say more like Google Stadia project, where a lot of this can be, all the heavy lifting on the rendering side can be done in the cloud and just streamed to a device that doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a $5,000 gaming computer to get that full immersive experience. But an area that I'm interested in, and it gets into problems of privacy and data protection and everything else, is that you still haven't found the hook to get that child's particular meaning engine or interest engaged in that problem.
I agree.
And the way that you can do that at scale is with machine learning. If you have a child or whoever is generating a body of work over the course of their scholastic life, and you have the ability to kind of quiz them on their interests and see what they engage in and see what they drill down into. Can you use that? Can you use a machine learning model that is learning from how other students with similar dynamics and learning characteristics have done, that is going to find the story behind the problem that's going to reach that child? Mm-hmm. Or the type of simulation, maybe it's not a car hitting a bridge, maybe it's planetary bodies colliding, or mm-hmm. maybe it's somebody giving a high five, or it's can you find a way to engage their interest and kick their own learning engine into gear? And I think machine learning holds a lot of promise for that, but there are scary things about it. Particularly when it comes to kids, and how much data do we have and store about them.
I see. What beyond the data itself, what are the fears on that side?
I think it is the data itself, and I think it's and for good reason. We're right now, WildWorks has been extremely busy trying to repair the damage done by a data breach that we suffered back a little over a month ago.
I think I saw your video on that actually, just before this.
Yeah, or about a month ago. And that's, fortunately, there wasn't information in there that compromised any children's anonymity or that, but there were things like their parents' email addresses that justifiably create a lot of concern. So a lot of parents are very concerned that, wait a minute, my email address is out there now and it's searchable. Somebody could find it. Mm-hmm. Somebody could use that to tailor spear phishing attacks to me. They're justifiably concerned. Now, talk about a child's learning profile and their interests and what drives them psychologically, and the volume of data that would need to be collected, monitored, analyzed to make that useful. Now that's kind of frightening. Do you want your child's information stored in such a way that it could be attached to them personally, potentially, follow them for the rest of their life? It's a sticky problem, but I also think that the seed of the solution is in there to scaling up education in a way that it operates for everybody the way the very best private schools or tutors do. which is, finding a way to engage a sense of meaning with that child, and then tailoring the mechanics of learning to what interests them and the type of learner that they are.
Yeah, I can see where, like, as you're describing it, I can see where, it can go and what it could potentially become. And I'm not a particularly smart person, so I'd imagine a lot of smarter people like you, as well as everybody else out there, probably has a vision for this, of what it can potentially be, what this future classroom can be. But it reminds me of this. I feel like it's one of those things where we all get in each other's way of making it an actuality or an eventuality. On this side, you're talking about like the protections and the hackers and all the people that we have to protect against just to make sure that the data is safe. And on another side, I'm thinking of, like, we're sitting here looking at I've been developing an artificially intelligent way of editing photographs, to take this workload away from photographers, to make it more simple to edit. Now, to get this thing to where I envision it, I need the cooperation of 3 different companies, because each of them has a piece of what I need. Each of them are their own profitable companies, and all 3 of them, unless I can sell them on this vision of what it can be together and to get them all to cooperate, this thing is never going to actually come to life. Unless I'm going to go and raise $100 million, which, Clark, this is the point in the conversation I'd like to ask if you have $100 million to loan to me.
Yeah. Do you have Venmo?
We're going to be transferring for the next 100 years, because I think 2,500 a week is your limit. But no, it's like, I know exactly how to get this product to life, and I've already tested it where these 3 pieces put together actually works, and I have it on my machine and it actually works. And the likelihood of it actually becoming a product and going to market is maybe 5 to 10%, because I'll guarantee one of these companies will step in the way and say, no, we're not willing to do this. We're already doing fine. We're going to keep things going as is. So it's one of those things that, like, going back to the classroom, is everybody can, I imagine a lot of people have visions that are far better than what I laid out. But it's getting all the pieces to line up to actually implement something like that seems incredibly challenging.
There are pieces to line up. You're right. But I think that the vision of the user experience of the interface is fundamentally what drives value there. Because in your example, let's use the example of the iPhone. Mm-hmm. There was no technology invented for the iPhone. There was a bunch of existing technology that was mostly being produced by other companies, from the processors to the touch screens to the process for aluminum extrusion, all of that. But there was one company that had a vision for the user experience and brought all those things together, and wouldn't have been able to do it if there was only one company producing each one of those things.
True.
There was more than one company producing something that would compete with Gorilla Glass, or something that would, compete with the Snapdragon processor. And because of that, they were able to pull those pieces together and experiment and come up with the user experience that made it work. In your example, maybe there is only one company that's doing some component of that. In which case, that's a tough problem. You've either got to find the other companies that are doing that or who would do that, or you've got to find a way to do it yourself, because you don't want to be completely dependent on the whim of their board to cooperate with this or not.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of. It's true, and I'm kind of curious now. So Feral is the next project that you guys are launching, but I'm kind of curious from just a personal standpoint. What do you feel like is the next area that excites you? Like, what is the next thing that, you've had a lot of time in game development. Is this kind of the area that you feel like you're going to stick with and kind of growing this path, or do you feel like there's something else that's calling you?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that interest me, and a lot of things that just as personal projects I mess around with. Right now the home solar industry really I have a lot of interest in it, and not necessarily in the, put panels on your roof and get off the grid thing, but more, what are individual devices that can be individually solar powered, that because of advances in batteries and panel efficiency recently, it might have been out of reach a few years ago. So if you look in my garage right now, you find that it's increasingly taken up with, soldering stuff and solar panels of different sizes. And
are you a tinkerer? I didn't know you were.
Wires and tinkers. Oh yeah. I love taking shit apart. And figuring out how it works and what the opportunities might be there. There are a lot of other things that I would like to build. I think I'll always have my hand in interactive, but I would like to build some physical playgrounds. I would like to build playground equipment that doesn't suck.
Yeah.
I would, the processes of learning through play are something that really excites me. But so does my individual writing, which really has nothing to do with any of that. It's more I don't know, the apocalyptic, humorous sci-fi.
I didn't know you wrote either. This is crazy.
Yeah. So the journey with Animal Jam and Feral, and I want to see those communities grow into everything that they can become. And grow to where they don't need me necessarily, behind the curtain, to continue growing and continue being of service to kids. And we've got other stuff on the drawing board now that's pretty exciting. It's in some different directions. Games will always be a part of that. Play will always be a part of that, I think, in one way or another.
Yeah. What are some of the solar devices that you think would be interesting? Like, what are you kind of playing around with? If you don't mind saying it. If it's a secret, that's okay too.
I wouldn't say it's a secret, because if you went by my house and you would see that the house is festooned with these things. I had the experience early in the pandemic of which I think a lot of people have had, of going to Home Depot or Costco or whatever and buying a bunch of pathway lights for the front of my house, or for the walkways in front of my house. And being struck, as many people probably are, as why do these suck so bad? Why do they have to suck so bad? Why do these stakes have to be plastic that go into the ground? Why do they all have to look like this same kind of soulless suburban oiled age bronze look to them? Why do the batteries in them have to suck? The lights suck.
I have a feeling that question is the impetus for pretty much every new product. Why does this suck so bad is the beginning of a new idea.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you saw what I've been working on for most of the summer and a lot of the pandemic and my free time, it's been to reinvent the solar pathway light in a way that's that people can bring their own creativity to it, and work with some pieces that are that are built to last forever, that deliver a lot better experience, but also are things that you get to contribute some of your own design to, kind of a Legos for grown-ups kind of thing. That's something that I've been playing around with.
You, my friend, are incredibly talented. I would say a genius level thinker. I could never. Yeah, I don't know how you kind of walk in and out of these different realms so seamlessly between the coding aspect, and I know you say that you don't, but I do know that you have the ability to understand and write code, as well as be able to understand business, interacting with people, as well as be good with your hands to go put all this stuff together. It's very impressive.
Well, I think it's easy to look at something from the outside and not see the chaos and tumult that might produce some small result. You just get to look at a sequence of small results, and but the things that I've been most successful with are things that have been very much driven by and dependent on the creativity and talent of others. I don't make Animal Jam. I don't make Feral. There is an extremely talented team behind both of those that my job is to enable them to do their jobs and stay out of their way as much as possible. Um, so I try to correct the record if I'm described as the creator of Animal Jam, because I don't. I have never assembled two pixels that contributed to something of use in Animal Jam
That's funny.
or two lines of code.
Well, so this is, I think, would be an interesting question here is if you were to, in the days of first starting Smart Bomb, compare what does your workday look like today versus what it looked like in the initial days of this startup? What would be the differences?
Oh, as you grow, I'm sure this is true in a lot of industries. In the games industry, the games industry is not huge. I know a lot of people who run studios, and I've seen them, from a startup of 5 people go to, uh, 9-figure exits. But I think that they all have in common that when you're small and starting out, you're wearing multiple hats, you're doing a lot of different things, and at least one of those things is going to be the thing that you're really passionate about. For me, that's game design, and doing the actual get your hands in it kind of defining and describing the user experience that we're going to create. But you have to gradually surrender more and more of that as you grow, because you become a bottleneck and it doesn't scale unless you're willing to release a significant amount of it. So I think early on in both of the game companies that I've been a part of, early on you would have seen me doing a lot of hands-on game design and writing design docs, writing backstories, writing pitches to take to publishers, to convince them to fund our projects. And then that becomes more and more abstracted into supporting the teams that are going to be doing the actual engineering and art and animation, and trying to find areas where I might still be a bottleneck and backfill those.
Interesting. So it sounds like today your role is, I mean, if I were to compare it, once again, going back to the Hollywood analogy, today you sound more like a producer of the product, where it's putting the right pieces into place, as opposed to when you first started kind of being more on the writing side, more on the development side of the actual. Do you find as much enjoyment at being on that side today as you did back then, or?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts of it that I really enjoy. I think that executives, once a company reaches a certain level, should be spending a double-digit percentage of their time looking for talent, looking for whether it's the next layer of management below you, or it's up-and-coming talent in an area where your company is deficient. That's how you grow, is by filling in those. When you're building the trains going down the track and you're throwing down track as you go, that's looking for talent. And then I think another double-digit percentage has to be devoted to looking at our products the way that consumers are seeing our products. So I will go into Animal Jam and create an account, and from the moment of creating an account to going through the parental consent flow to purchasing a subscription or canceling a subscription, look at all the places where where corners may have been cut, or where we can get better, or maybe the user experience isn't clear what I'm supposed to do next, or that. And we have product managers that are immersed in those games and that are looking at them, but it's difficult to be as immersed as they are and still have a consumer's eye view of it. So where I'm not in writing design documents or working hands-on with the designers and engineers to say, this is how this should feel when you walk through this room. I'm more looking at it from a consumer perspective and saying, here's where this is working and where it isn't.
I see. Interesting. And if there was, I guess I'm curious to know which aspect of it you appreciated more. Was it back in doing the game design, or do you feel like there's equal appreciation of both? Or
I think there's always appreciation where you can bring value, right? And those are both percentages of what I do. Both of those are not as big a percentages of what I do as I'd like, because I spend a lot of my time in business and legal and working with funding the business and making sure that we're still a healthy going concern. So I would love to do more of that. But yeah, I hear this from a lot of people whose game companies reach a certain point, is that I wish I could go back to it being just 10 of us or 20 of us or whatever size that they most fondly remember. And I don't know, I think that you have to pause and look at that and understand what it is that you're missing from that. What are you missing from that experience? Because if you feel it, then certainly other people in the company feel it. And if there's a creative spark that was there before that isn't now, some of that comes with scale, but some of that you can manage around. Maybe that involves me stepping in on some aspects of design more and getting my hands dirty in one or two areas. Maybe it involves just sitting in on meetings that I wouldn't typically sit in on.
But like you said, though, that can be challenging, considering if you take on too much in any of those areas, then you become the bottleneck. And it's difficult because you have your family, you have your personal life that you have to maintain as well. If we were all single, we'd just work all day. But
I had the experience where I think it was fairly early on after Instagram launched. I had an Instagram account and I had some personal pictures on there, and nobody followed it except maybe 10 friends and family in that. And then one day there was some amazing maquettes, some physical figures of characters from Animal Jam that one of our artists had created, and I put a picture of those up on my Instagram, and all of a sudden it blew up because there was an Animal Jam fan had been watching that account and then reposted that, and then all of a sudden all the Animal Jam players were coming in there, and pretty soon it was, I was staying up until 3-4 in the morning every night trying to answer everybody's questions individually, trying to respond to everybody. It was just impossible. It would not scale at all. And it wasn't the best use of my time either.
For sure.
I love having that close a connection with our players, but and so I'll still dip into there occasionally, but our community team runs my Instagram and answers questions there. And they don't post photos or do things, but they're doing all of the follow-up and lifting.
You mentioned something there. You mentioned something there that's super interesting, because from the standpoint of an individual entrepreneur, the best use of your time, you're only kind of affecting yourself, right? If you're in business for yourself, or if you work at a job, whatever it is that you might do, bad decisions in terms of like where you put your time affects you. But that's one of the things that I've had to grapple with a little bit over the past few years. It is now I have to take in consideration where I put my time. It might not be that effective, not only to Justin and Chris, but also all of our employees, all of our team members. And that me investing time that I could be using to generate revenue and create products and do that kind of stuff, but me kind of fooling around and messing around with new ideas and tinkering essentially can actually be damaging now to a group of people as opposed to just myself. So when because I didn't know for a long time, I wanted to write a book. The book that became Stupid Simple Relationships has been something that's been ongoing for 10 years. And I started writing it 3 years ago, but I didn't dare use company time for that project because I had no idea what was going to come from it, what it was going to be. I didn't know if it was just like, is this just a me kind of venting type thing? Is it me like kind of just comforting myself, or is this an actual place we're going to take the company? So early on in this, it was all just me spending my own time doing it until it became something that was, I could say, okay, now this can be in the best interest of everybody in the company. But that's a question that like you only have to start dealing with and addressing with when you're working with a team. So it's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's helpful for a person, but is certainly for a company to define and articulate its primary purpose, right? WildWorks' primary purpose is we create playgrounds where kids can find fun with substance. Mm-hmm. That's our mission statement. That's what it comes back to. So when I look at my time, where do I contribute the maximum value to that? There's some things that only I can do. Yeah. I have to be judicious about which of those really only I can do, and which are things that I might just be, holding on to unreasonably. But there's nothing wrong with defining that primary purpose and then saying, well, me on nights and weekends messing around with soldering solar panels onto things, it doesn't really contribute to that primary purpose. That's my thing. Maybe I turn that into a business. Maybe I never do. Maybe it becomes something, a few years down the road. But it's not really. It doesn't contribute value to WildWorks. It's not something that our,
like you said, if you go, let's say that game design is still that thing that you want to have your hands in. If you go and you put 20 hours of your week into game design, I would imagine that for your company as a whole, this is going to be very detrimental. Even though your game design skills might be better than the rest, like even though what you can add on that side is unique to you, the overall effect to your company would be negative because of what you can do that other people cannot.
Right.
And that's a very odd position to be in.
It's well, the more abstracted you are from the people who are putting pixels together in my industry, the more you have to be oriented in service to them. Mm-hmm. It's not about serving my creative needs. It's about being of service to them, and where can I be of maximum service to them. Ultimately, that results in products that I can contribute to, in maybe not in all the ways that I want to, but in ways. And for me, the most rewarding part of all of that is seeing the effect that we have on kids' lives.
Yeah.
And I don't mind looking at it from the perspective of, I can carve out a little time for my personal projects, for my creative things. I need to think about how can I be of maximum service to the company as a whole, and be judicious about where that time is spent that way.
100%. So I'm curious if it's if you were to study all of these different kind of startup and founding case studies, if you were to put all these together, I'm very curious if, the startup begins with kind of a need to exercise like your creative muscles. The startup begins with this need to create something that you see a need for. And then as the business grows, your role generally becomes more that of a facilitator or a producer of this, where you fall into those things. And then you begin this cycle again where you start setting aside outside time. So you facilitate and you put your time towards that business, but then you start tinkering and you start setting up outside time to bring the creativity back, to basically re-exercise those muscles and start creating again, and just basically begin the cycle again with something else. It kind of feels like this process where you're not exercising your creative muscles like you once were in the role that you're in. You're in the role of a facilitator and in the role of a producer, as opposed to 10 years back when your primary role is creativity. So I'm wondering, Do you feel that compulsion to be creating outside? Do you feel that?
Yeah. And if you deliberately deny that to if you say no, I've got to channel 100% of my energy into this, I have a fiduciary responsibility for 100% of my creative time to go into this. Ultimately, that is not the best way for me to be of service to the company.
Mm-hmm.
It is of more value for me to be of service to the company by maintaining the neural pathways that allowed me to be creative to begin with, and keeping those muscles working, right?
Yeah.
Because they can contribute in other ways. They can jump in and solve problems that other people are getting stuck on. And I need to be in a balanced and healthy place in order for me to be of maximum service to the kids that depend on us and the employees that depend on me. I have to make that time. I have to find some outlet for that creativity to maintain those pathways, or I'm failing at what the primary purpose was.
That's super interesting, because I started this book 3 years ago, and it was in a rut, in a period where I felt like I was just doing, like I was doing only what the company needed of me. As a partner, I was doing the education. I was going out and shooting and creating the products that I needed to. I was overseeing. I was doing the things and creating the resources that I need to. And it was this kind of creative low point for me, where it was, I have to have something else. I have to have something that I'm creating again that led me to that place. And it restored that balance. It's what made it possible during that creative rut to say, okay, I'm okay to go to work and to do my job, because I have this other thing that kind of fulfills me in a way. And now this is becoming my job. But it was a very odd period where it just felt like I was getting up, running full speed into a wall each day. And it was like, it was very discouraging.
Yeah. No, I feel you. There are times it's very difficult to, WildWorks has been going now since 2003.
Yeah.
That's a long ass time
That's crazy.
in game development world. And the products that we've been working on are, they take 2 years to launch, and then another 2 years to really develop and find their feet. And then you've got evergreen products that last for a long time. But how many of those do you get in a career? How many swings at something on that scale do you really get to take? Over a 30, 40-year career, that limits you to 4 or 5 things that you can build.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that limit ultimately. And it is easy to start feeling like you're in a rut there. That's part of why looking for talent is, I think, an essential executive function, because you need to be interacting directly with the young, hungry, super creative, super energized people that are new to the industry and that have all of the new ideas and things that maybe they don't know that they've already been thought of, or they don't, they've got a new reason why it shouldn't be rejected, or they've got technologies they've been looking at that you haven't bothered to. I think that that interaction helps with it. We talk, and I hear this, since the pandemic began quite a bit, of the importance of self-care, and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that, Jenny has, in her kind of just inherent wisdom, has really enforced for us.
Mm-hmm.
My problem with working from home is that I don't stop. I sit down at my desk in the morning and I can easily stand up again at 10 o'clock at night, and I have not done anything else.
I'm the exact same way.
Yeah. And she's the one who's saying no, even though, and I feel guilty that she's been with the kids who have stuck at home because schools are closed all day,
mm-hmm.
and she's having to deal with them and their school and education, and like, no, let me take over. And she's the one that will say, no, you need to go work out, or you need to go and you need to step away and take some time. You're no good to us burned out, right? And I have to do the same thing for her. We have to do the same thing for the kids.
What are part of those self-care routines that, aside from creating on your own, what are some of those things that you're talking? I mean, most of our audience can clearly guess that gym is one of those things for you.
For me, it is, yeah. And for Jenny and I are both very passionate about tennis.
Yeah.
And we, it's difficult living in Utah, where the outdoor tennis season is 6-8 months out of the year, because then there's that period where it's difficult to get indoor play time. So yeah, it's for both of us. She's running a lot, and for me, I have stuff that I can work out with at home, but it helps me to get out of the house and go for a walk or go to, I'm fortunate in that we have a gym that is extremely socially distanced, and where the protocols are very careful, and I can work out alone, but still be out of the house.
Yeah. How was Jiu Jitsu? Do you feel like that's going to take hold? Clark and I had a chance over last Christmas to, we did like a couple of minutes of grappling, just a little bit of rolling.
Oh, I think I was sweating and red and breathing like a blast furnace, because wow, it's a lot of fun. And if you caught me 20 years ago when I was doing a lot of martial arts, I think I would have been super into it, because it was really cool to see how much you had learned just, with a little bit of education, kind of experimentation. You had picked up so much in the dynamics of, your weight distribution and moving your body and applying your strength, that, God, that's fascinating. The kinetics of that is really interesting to me.
I think that's what drew me into it, was the technical side of the sport is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, but after 3 back surgeries, there are some sports I just am happy to say are doors that I have to be content with having closed.
Yeah, we had a little maneuver that I felt really bad for afterwards, but I think it was a sweep or something, and you kind of said, "Oh, that's it for me." And I was like, "Oh no, oh no."
No, I have all this titanium in my spine, and I never want to go back to how it was before that was all fixed.
Yeah, no,
I might be hyper vigilant there.
I think that is smart of you. I am curious, while we're on the subject of COVID in 2020, how has that impacted? We all know the impacts of day-to-day life, but how has that impacted WildWorks?
I think a lot of companies saw a COVID bump in March in particular. We did too. Of course, kids. For Animal Jam and the school age kids that are in there, we could probably do the weather report for the East Coast by just looking at the CCUs in Animal Jam.
That's crazy. Wait, CCUs are what? CC
are concurrent users. So
okay,
yeah, we see at 11 o'clock in the morning in New York, all of a sudden we've got thousands of kids logging in. It's a snow day. They closed the schools for snow, and this has been a very long snow day, because a lot of kids were sent home and are still trying to kind of figure out what their routine is going to be. So I would say that in terms of engagement and being able to provide kids with a place to see their friends, it's been great. But anything that affects the economy and the security of families is going to affect us, because all the things that you need to be investing in right now, particularly if you have any income insecurity because of the pandemic or your jobs as parents, the subscriptions to games are going to be pretty low on the list of priorities.
Yeah. Interesting. And I'd imagine from the workforce standpoint, is most of your team now remote? Are they remotely working, or are
Yeah.
they?
Yeah. We have a handful. We have quite a big office space, and we've put some pretty powerful air purifiers all over it. So there's constant downward pressure from people breathing, and everybody wears masks around the office. But we're also only talking about, maybe 10, 12 people working in a 20,000 square foot space. It's pretty easy to stay very distant. So most people are working from home, and which is, gone pretty smoothly.
Yeah.
The problem with it is not really in servicing games where a lot of the creative foundation's already there. Feral and Animal Jam, there's an edifice, there's scaffolding that's already there, and we're kind of building on it. For some of the new things that we're working on, that we're really just kind of trying to prototype new ideas, it sucks.
Because it's hindering the collaborative process of.
Yeah, it doesn't work over Zoom. You've got to have, people riffing in a room with a whiteboard and, too many donuts and whatever it takes to just bounce ideas around. You can't spitball that well over video chat.
Yeah, I find that even, we do these Zoom-based podcasts right now, just because it's difficult to get people into the studio, but there's such a significant difference of being in person and actually having the conversation versus doing it online. And granted, like the tools that we have now to do things online are great. More so if your work is like, I feel like it works really well if you're a piece of the team that kind of is called on just to come in and get a job done. Not so much when the process is two-way. So whenever the process is two-way, three-way, four-way, five-way, then the collaborative process just really suffers on this online experience. But I mean, that's very interesting. Go ahead.
Well, for photography, this has to be brutal, right? It's, you're got a lot of wedding business, a lot of the stuff that you usually do is exactly the stuff that's being shuttered.
Yeah, the entire, it's kind of crazy. You think about the entire events industry, not just weddings, but just events, sporting events, parties, everything. Like every one of these events-based industries are just decimated. And the crazy part about California is I'm apparently learning also that, like, I have friends in other states that, they're photographers, they do other things, they shoot weddings, they shoot events, and they're like, dude, we're just doing our own thing over here. Nobody cares. Whereas in California, it's like publicly our officials make it very well known that, we're on lockdown, we're on this, although privately everybody's kind of just doing their own thing. And you're talking about we're talking like big properties that are just like, we understand that the governor said this, but if you want to have your wedding here, come on over. We'll do 200 people indoors. It's fine. And it's kind of, to an extent you understand, because like these are big hotels and buildings and groups and companies that are going to go under. But to another extent, this lack of kind of like a federal game plan has been insane to me. Like, I don't know. How many times have we learned in business that tone from the top matters? Like, tone from the top is how you get an entire company to follow a particular direction, an entire team to follow a particular direction. We know this. And yet, from the government standpoint, it's been nutso. Like the tone from the top has been all over the place.
Yeah, varying from state to state.
Varying from state to state. So our business is, Linenger says, mostly shut down for the year. We're at maybe like 20% to 25% capacity compared to like a normal year. We're very fortunate that we have the educational side. We have online resources. We have software-based editing resources. We have all these other areas that are doing fine and sustaining us. But at the same time, how long can that go for? Like, because the people that we're selling to, most of our audiences are photographers. So eventually, with the exception of this podcast and the new platforms that we're developing that are more broad audience, but eventually the people that, are your customers, they're losing their income and they're going to stop purchasing the products. And so we've seen that dip begin to happen towards the end of the year. And if events aren't back up by mid next year, it's going to be more trouble. Like we're like across the board. So,
yeah. And mid next year is, I think when some of that stuff will start coming back if the vaccines pan out the way that we should. But it's such a lost opportunity when, a 4 to 6 week real shutdown could have stopped this
it would have been done
in April.
It would have been done.
Yeah.
Like,
and we'd have kids in school, we'd have parents back at work, and yeah, we'd still need a vaccine. Ultimately, we still need to be careful to an extent, but half-assing it, that doesn't matter to a virus. It doesn't say, well, if you're doing a 50% lockdown, then I'll only infect 50% of the people.
Well, and now we have this. So, back in April, May-ish, I'm sure you probably have had the experience where it was really like you maybe knew somebody across the country or knew somebody that had COVID. And then a few months later, you knew somebody directly that had COVID. And now it's on our doorstep. We're like, I have local friends and stuff that have had it. We have an employee that's currently out because his girlfriend has it. So now it's just like right here. So it's kind of crazy. 2020 has been this learning lesson for mankind of don't be stupid.
Yeah. I will not be sad to see this year go. I think the only things from this year that I'm going to miss are Eddie Van Halen and Sean Connery.
Wait, what happened there? What, Sean Connery passed away? Did Eddie Van Halen pass away?
Yeah.
Dude,
I'm sorry that you find out here on the podcast. That's awful.
I just found out here on the podcast. That is awful. Oh my goodness.
Sean Connery was like a couple weeks ago, wasn't it?
Sean Connery was recent. I remember that. What did Eddie Van Halen pass away from?
God, I think he had a few health problems. I don't remember what finally caught up with him, but
that's crazy.
Yeah, didn't you notice everybody was listening to Eruption around September or so?
I did notice the resurgence. I just didn't piece it together that he'd passed away. You kind of always see that resurgence of, the artist's music or their product when they pass on, but I didn't realize that. It feels like we've lost so many people this year.
I've lost a few.
That it's almost becoming numbing. You're like, okay.
Yeah, you're just, what's next? In Utah, right after the first wave of the pandemic, we had a big earthquake that did a lot of damage, and then we had
I didn't even know about that. What the heck?
There was this insane windstorm that took 100-year trees all over the city, and it just feels like it's one thing after the other. California was on fire, probably still is on fire for most of the.
That's a normal thing.
Yeah.
It's like we have a perpetual bonfire that's about 5 minutes from my house, but it seems like a regular thing out here. But when was Utah's earthquake?
Oh, God,
I should know this.
It was March. I think it was right. Yeah, I think it was right around the time that we were sending everybody home. Mid-March from the pandemic.
I can't recall if I'm just brain farting on this or if I actually didn't know about it, but I think it might just be my 40-year-old age coming up on me.
Yeah, I don't know if it was an earthquake that would even make the papers in Southern California, but
you said there was a good amount of damage, though, no?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of damage and more damage from the windstorm, but yeah.
That's crazy. Well, Clark, dude, I appreciate you jumping onto the podcast. I'm going to miss you guys this year. I know we're not gathering together this year for the holidays.
I know. And that's something that we look forward to and the kids look forward to all year is getting together with you guys and getting all of our kids. We will have to do that gathering of the tribe this summer when we can all be inoculated, right?
That's right. Cancun 2021.
I'm down. All
right, brother. Appreciate you. And in the meantime, if you guys are watching, be sure to check out Clark's and WildWorks, the incredible products that they have. So Animal Jam, you guys saw them already. We'll link them up, as well as Feral, right?
Feral, FER.AL.
FER.AL. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks, Clark.
Thanks, man. Take care.